Our lives are laid out on a road of bumps, turns, struggles, and more. How do we respond? How do we endure adversity for learning and growth? I'm Aubrey Johnson, and we'll explore these questions and more on the road to rediscovery. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Road to Rediscovery. I'm your host, Aubrey Johnson. The Road to Rediscovery is about reflecting on life lessons to learn and grow from them, and of course, pay it forward and uplift others who are struggling through dark times. How many of you knew that the Road to Rediscovery has a YouTube channel? Yeah, that's right. Each of the episodes you hear on your favorite platform can also be seen on YouTube upon their release every Thursday. This includes video shorts and solo episodes by yours truly. We're really pushing for a larger YouTube presence, so we could really use your help. The link to our channel is in the episode show notes. Just click the link, subscribe to the channel, and like any videos that you see on our channel. Let's work together to feed this algorithm. And I want to thank you all so very much for your support. All right. My special guest overcame a 10-year addiction to alcohol and is now the creator of the Sober Vibes podcast, an incredible show advocating alcohol-free living. Beyond the podcast, her amazing efforts include building a great sober community that values wellness and connection and educating others on how to live a booze-free life. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Courtney Andersen to the show. Courtney, welcome. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I'm excited to do this show with you today. And I love it. We are like, let's feed that algorithm. So yes, subscribe to that YouTube channel.
100%. Thank you so much for that support, Courtney.
You're welcome.
Big time. Really grateful. So we have a lot to unpack here, and I know you have some words of insight and inspiration for the listeners. If you can just give us a glimpse into your story, basically how and when you started drinking, some struggles during your addiction, and then that defining moment or time when you realize you didn't have to live like this.
Yeah, so I started drinking at 19. I consider myself a little bit of a late bloomer. It was something I
Okay.
always wanted to stay away from. I
Mhm,
drank like a couple times in high school and leading up to that
mhm.
point, but nothing serious. So 19, I live in the suburbs of Detroit, and you can go over Windsor over into Canada is about a 25-minute car ride. So the drinking age over there is 19. So at 19 on my birthday, it was something that we went over there, and it was like I absolutely fell in love with the bar scene. I fell in love that night with being drunk. Like I felt like I came out of my shell.
Yeah.
I always kind of was shy, and it was something that felt it just made me brave, right? Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was able to flirt with men, and it just put me into this next level of like, "Oh, okay, this is fun," right?
Yeah.
So then 19 to 25, what happened is that my drinking no longer became fun, it became a lot darker. And
Mm.
when I say that, I'm meaning that there was more consistent blackouts. There was nights that I would, wake up not knowing how I got home,
Right.
the vicious hangovers, the waking up in a hospital a couple times,
Yeah.
waking up in strangers' beds, being like, "What is this man's name?"
Yeah.
All of that up until I was 25. And then at 25, there was a point where it's like, it was a night after drinking. I'm like, there's going to be one day that I quit drinking. I
Yeah.
don't know when, I don't know how, but just my soul was telling me at 25 that
Mhm.
this was not going to be in my life forever. And I have to say at 25, what happened at 25 was also to my hangovers started becoming more of panic attacks and anxiety attacks.
Wow.
Yes. So I never had experienced that before, and at 25, I was like, "What?" I mean, there was one instance I was on a weekend bender, and I thought I was having a heart attack,
Yeah.
and I went to an urgent care, and they're like, "You're okay. I think you just had a panic attack." So
Yeah.
So from 25 to 29, what I tried doing was moderating. I tried controlling my drinking. I tried putting rules on it. Don't drink shots tonight, only stick to beer, only stick to wine, would take a week or two off, pat myself on the back to be like, okay, there's no problems. And I did this dance for 4 years. But what happened in that dance is that I always went back to where it started in the sense,
Yeah.
I would be on good behavior and then it would lead me back to where originally I was like, okay, I need to put all of these rules in place. And then that just becomes exhausting. And the cycle of shame and guilt through a period of 10 years, building up that anxiety, building up, it just became very, very exhausting. So finally at 29, I was 6 weeks shy of turning 30. I had my last drink on August 17th of 2012, but I
Okay.
count my sober date as August 18th of 2012. And it was my last night working in the bar industry because I was transitioning to the medical field full time.
Yeah.
And it was like any other night where it was like, okay, I'm not going to drink that much. And of course I did. That evening, I ended up losing my rescue cat for a second time under the
Oh,
influence.
no.
Yes, and, that evening ended up my boyfriend and I lived together at the time and ended up threatening his life as he was trying to sleep, me in a functioning blackout. So, I
Oh,
woke up to this the next morning, and I was told that I had lost my cat and what I had said to my boyfriend, and for 3 days, I laid in this hangover, this extreme guilt, and
yeah.
it was almost like all that 10 years was coming up to that point just to be like, I can't do this anymore. I can't live
Right.
like this anymore, right?
Mhm.
And even towards the end of my drinking days, my drinking career, I wasn't a person who drank every day. You would have thought of me I thought of myself as a binge drinker, right? And I
Yeah.
had no off switch for it. So by the time it ended, I made a pact for the universe, to the universe, and I said, if I find my cat, I'm gonna give this non-drinking thing a go. I found her on the third day. It was
Great.
one I had this very spiritual moment
Mhm.
in that moment that will stick with me for the rest of my life, and I haven't had a drink and this August of 2024 will be 12 years. I'm on 11 and a half years of no drinking, and that boyfriend's my husband, and we have a 2.5-year-old
Wonderful.
son.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
My goodness, Courtney, that is a wonderful ending.
Yes, yes.
Yes, a very, very wonderful ending, a pretty ending.
Mhm,
And I'm very impressed that early on, even though it wasn't managed or it didn't, the result wasn't in your favor early, but early on you did have the self awareness to
mhm.
realize, hey, if I stay this course, this is not going to end pretty. So you tried to put rules around and kind of moderate yourself, and
Mhm.
I think that's a heck of a lot more than anyone in their mid 20s would do.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I mean, it's definitely and, I have to say this for anybody who ends I do think that everybody who has a problem with something, whatever it is, right? Like, whatever it is nowadays,
yeah,
that in your soul there's an issue. It's
yes,
just whether you tend to act on it or not, or it takes you a couple of years to get there, and I have to say with a lot of people, especially with the drinking issue, it takes a lot of people a couple of years to get there. Me losing my cat for the second time and threatening Matthew's life was not the worst thing that I did. It
mm,
wasn't. It wasn't the worst, quote, unquote, "bottoms" that I had.
right,
I had
right,
a thousand awakenings, but it was in that moment where I was just like, I'm done." And
yes,
that's I believe that every person who has an issue with the substance, whatever it is, you come to that moment and you're just like, "I just cannot live like this anymore." And
and
then you start making a change.
that was your defining moment right there.
Yes,
Wonderful.
totally, totally. Because that was a thing, and I don't know if I said it, but my Fiona, my cat, she's still with us today too.
Oh, that's
And like,
great.
yeah, so it was one of those things. It's like, I don't know if I would have been brought back if she never came back. If she would
Mhm.
never came back to me, I don't know how I would have continued to that would have been such huge guilt to live with of losing an
Yeah.
animal,
Yeah.
under the influence, so, like, I wouldn't know how to have lived with that guilt.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
And my goodness, thank goodness you found her, like,
Mhm.
in that 3-day time period, right? And yeah, that it is hard to live with ourselves,
Yes.
not just at the fact of losing a pet, a
Mhm.
very close, endearing pet, but how we lost the pet, right?
Right, right,
Yeah,
right, and that's the thing too, and at that time, it was like, because a lot of people will say, like, "You shouldn't get sober for somebody else or quit doing that," and
right.
I have to say this, at the end of the day, I did want it for myself, but
Yeah,
in those beginning days and seconds and hours and
yeah,
months in that first year, I
yeah,
had to just keep reminding myself, and thank God she was there. She was a daily reminder. Matthew was a
yeah,
daily reminder of just,
yes.
like, where my drinking was gonna continue to lead me.
Yes, yes,
Mhm,
understood,
mhm,
100%, Courtney,
mhm,
understood. I have a question for you. It's regarding when I ask this question, it's not implying that you had different reasons, but
mhm,
just in general, someone who is going through an alcohol addiction.
mhm,
And I've heard this before. Um, uh, and I feel it's true when, with one's excessive drinking, um, it's usually due to something beneath the surface, a
mhm,
deeper root cause.
mhm.
Do you find that so or accurate? It may not be common from person to person, but is there a deeper root cause? With some people who follow that addictive journey.
I do, I do. I think there's a
Okay.
large percent. I definitely think it's a large percent with alcohol, but
Yeah, yeah.
there's a large person, and I had emotional trauma. Of
Mhm.
we all have an emotional trauma or a physical trauma or something. We all have trauma. Okay.
Yes,
A
yes,
majority of people do, and I really think that that is usually the root cause when it comes to addiction, because then
right?
it's like the addiction is the coping mechanism. So,
Yes,
but also too, on the other hand, I do wanna say that because alcohol is one of the most addictive substances that is legal and is glamorized, and it's so part of the society, that it is very easy also too for people to fall into the habit and then gain that addiction. For example, the lockdown, COVID. So
oh,
many
yeah, oh,
people
yeah.
developed out of just like, "Okay, cool, I'm home, I'm working from home, like, let's start drinking at 10."
Mm,
So many people now are waking up to be like,
yeah,
and I've worked with many of being like, this started in COVID. So I
yeah.
think majority of it though is from some trauma.
Oh, of course. I mean,
Mhm.
and COVID was a great example. I mean, that is a slippery slope, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and COVID was very traumatic. I like
absolutely.
that lockdown, that world and what was going on the world
Yeah,
in uncertain times, and
mhm,
everybody, and it could have been traumatic for the stay-at-home mom who thought that there was freedom now of having the kids at school and then having to reemerge with the kids every day, and then
yeah,
for people losing jobs, like, everybody reacted to it very differently, but at the end of the day, that was a very overall traumatic situation for the world.
for everyone.
Mhm,
Absolutely. Yeah,
mhm,
for everyone.
yeah,
I wanna pivot now and talk about your recovery. What
sure.
was your recovery like? And as you give this answer, I want you to maybe kinda keep this in mind. Um with the traditional 12-step
Mhm,
process
mhm,
through Alcoholics Anonymous, if I mean, if that was a way for your recovery, cool, but if not,
mhm,
then, again, with all due respect to the AA institution and the
mhm,
countless many people who have recovered through them, wanted to also get your thoughts for the benefit of the listeners
mhm,
on the relevance of the 12 steps in today's world.
mhm,
And since there's a lot of things that have changed since the beginning of AA in this world, with technology, the information age, and so forth, and with just the mindset of the new generations,
Yeah.
who are now becoming of drinking age. Um, is Do you feel there's a need for a tweak or an alteration or a change in any of those steps? So
Yes.
I know it's a loaded question, but I'm just asking for your recovery story,
Mhm.
and then in relation to the 12 steps for the AA program, with today's world, should there
Yes.
be, a tweak?
Yes. So my recovery story is that I tried AA in the very beginning, but
Mhm.
at that moment in time, there's a lot of God talk. There
Yeah.
is, there is, and this
Mhm.
is not. This is where people have to understand
Mhm.
that at that time where I was at, I wasn't connected to a higher power, right? Like
Right.
I wasn't there. I grew up with a very spiritual mother. I had that
Mhm.
spiritualness in me, but
Mhm.
when you're in a low part of an addiction
Mhm.
and the world kind of, you saw some stuff in the world, you're not like, okay, let me get connected with God. It takes a minute. And for me,
Yes.
my spiritualness came back in my road of recovery. So in the beginning of sitting there and listening, with God being mentioned, I had anxiety, and definitely some social anxiety at that time. I did not connect with it. Sitting there and listening to somebody's story where they had 10, 15, 20 years of sobriety, I'm like, "Oh my, am I gonna make it to day 5?"
Yeah, yeah. Right.
So, it can be very intimidating and, so I stopped going. I only went
Okay.
to a couple, and
Mhm.
that first year, I really white knuckled it, and then it
Yeah.
was year 2 that I got more into, working out, eating better. I found, a healing power in exercising, and then
Yes.
eventually I went back to therapy because 'cause I've been in therapy for years and years of
Mhm.
my life. I've been in therapy since, like, high school. So,
Mhm.
I always believed in the power of therapy, went back to therapy. I've hired coaches in my journey. I got connected again with my spiritual side. I did go back to AA though, my 3rd year of,
Yeah.
recovery, and I did it for a
Nice.
summer, and that is actually where Sober Vibes was created because of what I sat and I learned,
Mhm.
and I participated, and that was my recovery. But now to answer your questions about AA, I definitely think that it needs a facelift.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, it's 2024, and it's some of the steps are absolutely doable.
Sure.
Right? Like, my first year, I did make my amends on my 1-year sober anniversary. I made my amends to people who are relevant in my life.
Yes.
And I think some of that step work is absolutely great, but I also
Mhm.
think some of it, it's outdated. So,
Mhm.
the big books, that is outdated because we are going back to 2 men creating this in the late 30s, early 40s, and this
Yes.
is just what has gone on. And then also too, there's a whole, thing, and this is what I learned, is that there's no one way to recover, and
Right.
there's a big attitude in AA that AA is the only program of where you can get sober. And
I see.
so there's a lot of that, and of what I've experienced in it, and
Mhm.
I don't think that because you leave a program that you're going to start drinking again. Yes, some people, but not everybody.
Right.
So I think that the, institution of AA needs a facelift.
Gotcha. Nope, that
Mhm,
makes a lot of sense, and,
mhm.
and that's a fair assessment. I mean,
Yeah.
especially for one who's went through it, such as yourself.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I appreciate that insight, for
Yes,
sure.
and I wanna
Um
add in this disclaimer because I always say it and I say it on my podcast too.
Yeah.
You anybody, with your listeners, if they're on the fence about AA, please go.
Yeah,
Because I say to everybody, you gotta check it out. You have to check it out for yourself. Check it out a couple times, and if it didn't vibe with you, then it's like, okay, fine. Or if it's somewhere you like to go, this is what I just say, take what you want and leave the rest.
there you go.
And because it is a great place to be with people in person
Yes,
who understand what you're going through.
yes. Take the parts that work for you.
Yeah, and you
For sure.
gotta you gotta apply that to anything in life, and I
Yes.
just think it was that because it's just one of those things like anything nowadays, it's like there's a couple bad apples, and then it's
Right.
like then this gets like a bad rep,
Yeah. Yeah.
and especially too with like the God talk of what I just said, but for me at that time, that's honesty and that's my story, but I didn't hold it against these people in AA. It's like, okay, this is a strong part of it.
Right.
And again, when I went back, it's like I'm taking what I want and I'm leaving the rest.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That's great advice.
Mhm,
Great insight for sure, Courtney. Thank you for that
mhm,
insight. With for sure. And as you were giving that insight, you
mhm,
mentioned a few things that kind of resonated with me. You talked about how you started to focus on your health, eating
mhm,
better, and
mhm,
exercise, and so
mhm,
forth. And you also started. You also talked about just some of the dark times when you were binge drinking, the blackouts,
mhm,
the guilt, the anxiety,
mhm,
and just some of those events, right? So, one thing I wanted to ask is, people quit drinking for different reasons,
mhm,
and one reason may be because they've found um, vocation or a hobby that has
mhm,
they have new found fulfillment in their
mhm.
lives. They have more purpose, and so to them, from a priority standpoint, that fulfills them more than any bottle. And then
Yeah.
others um, stop drinking because of the hell it put them through with these blackouts and hangovers that are excruciating
Mhm.
so there's different reasons, and I was wondering, what are your thoughts on is one reason for quitting any healthier than the other? And in some cases, some people have both occurrences. The bad memories of the hangovers and not wanting to relive those, and find a vocation and a hobby that fulfills them more.
Yeah. So I don't think that one reason or the other is important to quit drinking. And this is where, because this is how I describe it, because you hear
Mhm.
it a lot of too. And it's like, you know, I hear it a lot from people. It's like, well, I don't have a physical dependency on alcohol. And that's where
Yeah.
I stop people and I'm like, listen,
Mhm.
it doesn't matter if you were taken to the point of physical dependency of having to go to medical detox. That
Yeah.
doesn't matter. Okay.
No.
What matters is you have an emotional dependence, and everybody who gets into this situation gains an emotional dependence on alcohol.
Mhm.
So whether you had 1,000 rock bottoms like I did, or you are just quitting because you're like, I have anxiety afterwards, after a
Yeah.
day of drinking. Nothing quote unquote bad happens, but you find yourself in this cycle where it's constantly thinking about alcohol and when you're going to drink next, and then like, detoxing in the morning and then coming up at lunch being like, okay, I feel better, waiting for
Yeah.
my drink at 5 o'clock. It's a
Yeah.
vicious cycle that you're on. You're not getting proper sleep.
Mhm.
You are putting pure poison into your system, and,
Yeah.
I just think that it's if anybody has the power to give up alcohol for whatever reason it is,
Mhm.
amazing. Amazing. So, it's just
Yeah.
but it is that emotional dependence. It's like that physical dependency. I don't know where the story
Yeah.
throughout these years became a thing where it's like because then you're making it seem like you're better than somebody else who does have a
Yeah.
physical dependency, who does have
Right.
to go to a hospital to detox. And hey, at the end of the day, everybody's bodies processes alcohol differently
Right.
and metabolizes differently, and
Yeah.
genetics comes into play and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I
Yeah.
just think that there's no, there's no good. good or bad reason to quit
Reason.
drink. Yeah, just when
Yeah,
you're ready,
yeah,
when you're sick of it, when you're like, I can't live
yeah.
like this anymore," then it's time for you to put the alcohol down.
100%, 100%.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to share with you a little story on, my experience
Mhm,
and not my experience through drinking.
mhm.
I've had that journey, and, I'm so happy to be on the other side of it.
Mhm.
But my journey as a child or a teenager with a parent who was an alcoholic,
Yeah.
my father. And he's passed since '06, so he's been passed a while. But and he's always been very philosophical when it comes to certain things. Okay,
Mhm.
and and this is no different. So, you know, my father, he was an alcoholic until I was about 15, and then he went to AA, or the I'm a military brat, so both my parents served, and he went to the military version
Yeah,
of AA.
right.
After that, he quit, and he never looked back. Some people relapse, some don't. I mean,
Mhm, mhm.
he never looked back. And as the years went on, he got very philosophical um, about drinking and quitting drinking. And he talks about how he'd love to go to the racetrack and play the horses, right? So he'd
Mhm,
go play the horses, and he would run into a friend that, you know years ago, he used to drink with at the racetrack. And so he says, that person still drinks. I talk to them, and I slowly watch him go into a world that I can't enter. And that's how he
mhm.
would say it. That's just an example of how philosophical he's been, and has been with things, this included. So now, fast forward to when I'm 17, okay, and I'm almost 18, and I start experimenting
Mhm,
with alcohol. And he once told me, when it comes to drinking in a social setting, and someone who has quit drinking in a social setting, he didn't let that interrupt his social life. He
yeah.
he still did things, but he knew when to draw the line and just kind of throw his hands up and say, "Okay, guys, I'm out of here." Blah blah blah. Right.
Mhm,
He told me this, and over the years, I found it to be true. And I wanted to know if you had any thoughts on this. He told, and this is almost word for word. He said, when you become an adult and you drink among other adults, when it really comes down to it, no one really cares if you drink or if you don't drink.
mhm,
And, meaning, I don't know, around my own circle of friends, I found that out.
mhm,
Now, this is with the exception of, say, teenage years, because of the strength and the power of peer pressure.
mhm,
When they're underage, shouldn't be drinking anyway. But you don't, at least in my circle, I didn't have that pressure. Come on, take a shot, take a shot, take a shot. And then the day that I met my coworkers for a happy hour and told them, you know, I'm no longer drinking, they say, well, congratulations. And then we
mhm,
continue with our conversation,
mhm,
you know? And
mhm.
this was like in I would say, my early 30s. And
Yeah,
then 2 years later, I relapsed, start taking, just a couple drinks here and there around that same circle. No one said, "Hey, Aubrey," and I
right.
mean, and there is an accountability thing, especially within myself. But I guess it made me think of what my dad said. No one really cares if you drink or don't drink, and I mean, all things in moderation, as long as you're not just, getting sloppy drunk and you're causing and hurting other people. Short of that, in a social setting.
Mhm.
Do you have any thoughts on that, or is that just based on individual experience, or what?
No, I mean, your dad was a wise man because that is, like, it's very true. because people put so much, especially women.
Mhm,
Women put a lot of pressure on themselves. I think with men it is a little bit different, but women
mhm,
put a lot of pressure on themselves with
mhm.
the friends. And one of
Yeah,
their biggest fears is one of them, and I hear it a lot, is like, I'm scared what people are going to think, and I'm scared of losing friends.
yeah,
And I really do believe that 90% of people do not care that you don't drink. But it's
yeah.
the ones who usually have a problem
Mhm.
are gonna be the ones that care because they actually benefited from you drinking as well.
Right.
You could have been their drinking buddy, that
Yes.
you could have been the person that they projected onto, so it took away, from them, like a deflection, right?
Yeah,
That to
yeah,
cover up their own problem.
yep,
So yeah, I really do think in the adults, and then there is that flip side that if somebody does relapse, or start drinking again, there's no questions asked really about it because
yeah,
I don't think that people know how to bring that up, or they're just like, okay, Abby's drinking again, like it's okay. But
yeah,
that's
one or the
where
other.
right, but that
Yeah,
is where it's a tricky one because that is how embedded alcohol is in our society.
so
Now,
true.
and honestly, imagine if you were like, "Okay, guys, I'm no longer doing cocaine anymore. I'm no longer doing like,
Right.
I'm not doing I quit heroin." Okay.
Yeah,
2 years later, you bust out cocaine or you bust out heroin and start
yeah,
using in front of them,
yeah.
they're gonna say something because
Yes.
that's where alcohol, it's like, this is a substance that is killing people
Yes, it
and
is.
is related to so many diseases,
Yes.
and we don't say anything. And we
Mm,
just allow people, there's no accountability. It's like, "Hey, what are you
yeah.
doing? You're not drinking anymore?"
Yep,
And
yep.
it's a hard one because that second part just goes into based on how alcohol is viewed in our society.
Yeah, so true, and that is some seriously deep insight, that you just shared, and I never got to the heart of why most
Yeah,
people care or don't care if you do or if you don't.
yeah,
And you hit the nail right on the head from a society standpoint, in how it's glamorized and just, it's so common in social settings, yet it's dangerous as cocaine. I mean, especially when you get behind a wheel, right?
r
Um, yeah,
right,
yeah,
exactly, and that's the thing, it's and yes, and that's the thing, it's like, just look at how marijuana has been viewed
yeah,
through all of these years,
yep,
and nobody's killing, I mean, not to my knowledge,
yeah,
killing another person behind a wheel.
right,
No
right.
one's beating the crap out of their wife when they're high on marijuana. Like,
No,
but this happens with alcohol use, So
yeah, and
it
it's
is
legal,
there's so many layers to it, and
yeah,
now it's like, and from my perspective too, I like, if people wanna drink, you're gonna drink, okay? So
right.
I'm not talking to people because I do believe people can drink and don't have problems. I'm
Sure, sure.
I'm talking to
Yeah.
the people who have problems like me.
Yes.
Um, but now too, it's being sold everywhere.
Yep,
And I get why people are selling it in their businesses because you can make a
yep,
huge profit on beer and wine and liquor.
yep,
So, it's legitimately everywhere. I just saw it, one of the gyms in the area I live in are
yeah.
is introducing alcohol. It's like, "What are you doing?"
A
You know?
gym.
A
Oh
gym,
my
a
goodness.
gym. They're gonna bring alcohol into their facility. It's like,
Oh,
"Oh my god."
come on. Yeah, it's nothing
Mhm.
sacred. I mean,
Well,
the
exactly.
workout institution, I mean, who's thinking about taking a drink, I mean, while they're working out,
Well, that's the
I
whole
don't know.
thing too. It's like, hello,
Yeah,
it's not healthy. It's n
right.
all of these quote unquote, uh, red wine is good for the heart.
Yeah, yeah.
That is BS. That was
Okay.
funded by a wine company, like, you gotta look at where the money's coming from with these studies,
Right,
and in
right.
the past couple years, more and more research is coming out to be like, alcohol is tied to this,
Mhm,
alcohol does is actually worse for the heart, like,
mhm, mhm.
it is poison.
No, it is, without a doubt.
Mhm.
No, it truly is. And, Courtney, I'd like to now pivot, if we can, to
Sure.
your amazing community,
Yes.
and, just love to, ask you to give us a glimpse into, um, sober vibes
Mhm.
and the community that you've built from it, and then, also share for the benefit of the listeners, just some ways that you can live an enjoyable sober living that's not boring.
Mhm.
Okay,
Mhm.
maybe an example of a couple mocktails, or how you can have a responsible, sober, booze-free, social
Yes.
life
Yeah.
amongst other adults,
Mhm.
and not have that type of poison, in the mix.
Right. So this is so I do have to start going back to where Sober Vibes came from because
Yeah,
this will make a lot more sense. So when I was sitting
great.
in AA that summer, I sat at the women's table and I
Hmm.
was listening to the women talk about, they wish they would be able to go out and just like enjoy a Tigers game
Hmm.
and be with people and not worrying about drinking, right? So I'm like
Yeah,
listening to these women and then also too for myself at that time of what I needed, I was like, "This has got to be way more empowering." And that's always where I have come from. I have come from more of a positive approach
yes,
and in life and just be like, "Okay, this does not have to be doom and gloom all the time." Like
right.
you can go out to do that, right? Like
Yeah,
I think there's something to be said when you're told, like, not to participate in things or you shouldn't do that, and it limits you. If you listen to those
yeah,
people who tell you not to do something
yeah,
where you at least need to try to see if you're okay in that situation, you need to do
right.
it. So
Yes.
Sober Vibes was created, it really was created in 2016-ish, 17-ish, and I
Hmm.
started, an Instagram page and then a Facebook group page. In the Facebook group, I've always just held for women, because I didn't want any funny business going around, and I
Yep.
didn't want it to be
Yep.
because how women recover and talk about things, they're more prone to talk about things when there's not the male presence in the room,
Yes.
especially
Yes.
too on some in a lot of situations, there has been sexual assault in
Oh my
in their
God.
drinking days and all of that. So
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
I've I'm geared more towards, women and building
Yes.
that community, so it really is for the sober and sober curious community, and also too with Sober Vibes, it's really meeting you at and that's how my coaching style is. I meet people where they're at because
Right.
everybody's situation is very different and it's not all like this, okay, you need to start here. Like
Right.
it's everybody is
No
different
cookie
and
cutter. Yeah.
it's really not,
Yeah. Yeah.
and yeah, so I created Sober Vibes and it has, grown into an amazing, amazing community and supportive. And then my coaching program, and then it has grown into the podcast. And then
Yeah.
I founded National Sober Day, which was on September 14th
Yes.
of every calendar year. So that's just really a celebration of sobriety, but more awareness to addiction and recovery
Yes.
because they do go hand and you got to talk about both
Oh
of
yeah.
them.
Oh yeah.
And then this past summer I my first published book was released and that's called A Sober Vibes, a guide to thriving in your first 3 months without alcohol. So that's a coach walking you through it and there's journal prompts in there and coach tips and really what to expect in those first 3 months. So yeah, so that is what his sober vibes has been created. So I couldn't be more proud of something that was created in a meeting of what other women wanted
Yeah.
and needed.
It's yeah, yeah. Others needed it,
Yes.
and so, and I completely understand, focusing the community on women specifically,
Mhm,
especially due to some of the stories that that they share,
mhm.
that is relatable from woman to woman, and being more comfortable in that type of that setting where it's not mixed company. Um, uh, wow. I mean, it's so amazing, and I am always fascinated at um, how different people are inspired from different circumstances and
Mhm,
different settings and different experiences,
mhm,
right? And for this to be your springboard to inspire you to begin the community of sober vibes while in that AA meeting,
mhm,
around, in the women's group,
mhm.
is nothing short of astounding, and it was planting the seed of the great work you're doing today to change the lives of others, so many others, for the better. Courtney, I really must commend you on this great work you're doing and building the community that you have built, and advocating for sober living
Mhm.
and a booze-free life, in a fun way,
Yeah.
and that needs to be done, because it's not all doom and gloom, and
Mhm.
we're not all regulated to only doing things in the daytime, because nighttime usually relates to drinking. I mean, it
Yeah.
doesn't have to, right?
No, it doesn't, and that's the thing too, and to get to of the fun part, and here's the thing, now which was great in 2024, there are so many NA beer options, there are so many
Right.
mocktails out there, like, a
Yes.
lot of these restaurants and bars are starting to incorporate mocktail menus, and, like,
Yes.
again, my disclaimer, because I say it on this one, if mocktails or NA beers trigger you, please do not drink them, but,
Yes.
like, but the NA beers, like, back in 2012, all I had to drink was O'Doul's, and O'Doul's,
Right.
sorry, O'Doul's is the worst.
So limited. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And, like, now there's IPA NAs,
Yep.
and it's just, like, it's amazing because then it's, like, it's inclusive, and
Right.
it's wonderful, and then even too for people who are like, "I don't wanna drink tonight, I'm the DD," if they wanna get an NA, like, cool. But
Yeah.
to go back to the fun part, I always say this to people, and going back to what your dad said, that's a perfect thing of how he was like, because I call it when people get on planet Pluto, I'm like,
Yeah.
"Alright, it's time to go."
Right,
I
right,
that
right.
you can still socialize, you can
Yeah.
still go out, but there is a time threshold that you have to do for yourself if you're still feeling comfortable, but there is a time
Yes.
when you're like, people are now repeating themselves. It's
Right.
time for me to exit stage. But yeah, to go out, you
Right.
got to look at it like this. When people are like,
Yeah.
"Well, what's to do?"
Right.
Everything you did in your drinking days you can do in your alcohol-free days,
Oh, yeah.
you just don't do it with alcohol. I have been
Yeah.
to numerous amounts of weddings. I have
Yep.
been to numerous amounts of concerts. I
Yep.
have gone to many restaurants with girlfriends
Yeah.
at an 8 o'clock hour and stayed there for 3 hours
Yeah.
talking and hanging out and did it all without drinking,
Yeah.
so I went through the pandemic without drinking, like, this is all like,
It's huge.
everything yes, you can do it, so and it's
Yeah.
all fun because you really have to look at it and shift your mindset, like, and play the tape forward and think to yourself, you how if I drink tonight, how is my next day gonna look for me? But also
Yes.
keep remembering, like, was that drinking really quote unquote fun? Because the
Right.
aftermath of drinking lasts way longer than the actual act of drinking.
100%. In fact, being a podcaster, I mean, I listen to a ton of podcasts,
Yeah.
okay? And so, 2 things I want to point out real quick, Courtney.
Mhm.
Number 1, um, I was listening to this podcast where James Corden, the,
Oh, yeah.
talk show host,
Mhm.
from Great Britain, he mentioned something about alcohol. He said that, you know, um, the day or the evening that you choose to take a drink, you are robbing time from your tomorrow
Yes.
to use today,
Yes.
because of what you will be going through in recovering, and the whole thing. Obviously, if you go overboard, especially, right?
Right. Right.
That was the first thing, and then the second thing is, I was listening to a different podcast with comedian Dane Cook. He was a guest on this podcast,
Okay.
and he is a great comedian. He's
Mhm.
on fire. He's hyper. He has a great sense of humor,
Mhm.
and he says he's never taken a drop of alcohol. It just doesn't, he didn't think it would ever do anything for him. So He just never did.
Yeah.
So, what fires him up is socializing with people, is getting
Mhm.
people to smile, getting people to laugh, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's what gets him going. And then
Mhm.
finally, like you said, my father, he had a gauge on how long he would
Yeah.
stay somewhere. He would be mindful of the telltale signs,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
When people start repeating things, to your point,
Mhm.
when the room gets louder,
Yeah. Yeah.
then that's another one. And so one and he would leave earlier, obviously, than he did when he was drinking. And he would always say this. I hear it to this day in my head. He says, "Alcohol, it distorts the judgment portion of your mind."
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Those are his exact words, one by one, and it's because of the alcohol why I stayed so much later when I did drink,
Oh,
versus now I leave.
right, right.
Yeah.
And I have this rule I set, and I share it in my book and explain more about it, but I call it the
Mhm.
60-minute rule. And this is what I
Yeah.
tell people. Go
Okay.
for an hour.
Yeah.
Go for an hour. Give yourself um arrive at the start time and then go for an
Good.
hour.
Yep.
If your fun tank is full, then leave. But if you
Yeah.
need to stay another 30 minutes, gauge it out exactly
Right.
with your dad, because
Yeah.
at the end, and if you are living a sober life, you don't want to keep putting yourself in triggering situations where you're just
No.
going to say, F this, it's time for me to
Right.
drink. And
Yeah.
that
Right.
usually happens when you're fighting yourself, and just like where you could have left 30 minutes earlier and all
Yes.
was good. So yeah,
Yes.
60-minute rule. It's the best.
Complete. I love that 60-minute rule. I,
Mhm.
I I really do. I mean, that's a great insight. That's a great tip, and piece of advice to, for someone exploring a sober way of
Mhm.
living, to try to still socialize.
Yes.
And by the way, Courtney, congratulations on your book.
Thank you.
And absolutely. And speaking of which, I would love it if you can share with the listeners how they can follow you,
Sure.
learn more about the great work you're doing, maybe pick up a copy of your book and listen to your podcast.
Sure. Out of all of these social media platforms, I partied the most on Instagram. So you can
Okay,
reach out to me at Sober Vibes. I am very active in my DMs too, so feel free to shoot me a DM if you need anything. But at Sober Vibes on Instagram, my podcast is Sober Vibes. You can find it on all of the platforms. And
great.
I actually just put mine on YouTube too, but not video format, just the audio.
Sure, sure.
So it is on YouTube, and my website is courtneyrecovered.com. You can find I have a lot of freebies, and too, if you need coaching, I have a group coaching community and a one-on-one support. And then my book is on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. So it's again Sober Vibes: A Guide to Thriving in Your First 3 Months Without Alcohol.
A Guide to Thriving in Your First 3 Months Without Alcohol,
Mhm,
a great book, a
mhm.
great podcast, a great community. Courtney Andersen, I want to thank you so much for coming on to the show, sharing some great insights. I want to thank you for your transparency and just letting us have a glimpse into your journey, which led to the great work you're doing now and the way you're helping others now. So let's please stay in touch. I would love to have you come back on the show at a future time. If
Sure.
you publish another book or have a special event or for any reason, just to talk,
Yes.
I'd love to have you back on the show.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I enjoyed this conversation very much.
Oh, thank you. Likewise, I truly enjoyed it. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in and listening. And as always, we want all of our listeners to know when dealing with life struggles, you're never alone, and there's always hope. Please share this show with someone you know who needs inspiration and support. And please always remember, we're all roadies on this journey of life. And it sure feels good having you on the road with me. Thanks again for listening. We'll chat again soon. We really hope you enjoyed this episode of The Road to Rediscovery. We'd love to hear from you. Shoot us an email at roadtorediscoverypodcast@gmail.com and leave us any questions or comments you may have.